Hey there, we're the Westlaw Pirates and welcome to the show. We're here to share our thoughts on Northwestern athletics and college sports with thoughts and analysis from the visceral to the statistical. We run our tailgate with the red pirate flag flying high above as we give no quarter, especially the fourth. I'm Sam Walter.
I'm John Lacombe.
And I'm Eric Skoskauspo.
Well, guys, we have finished our previews of teams Northwestern does not play in the Big Ten this year. Obviously, we're not doing previews of every team Northwestern does not play. We would be here all summer long, and I don't know about you guys. I would like to enjoy the summer.
I mean, how much difference is there between the new Big Ten and the entire Power Five? I feel like there's not too much of a difference at this point. It's all just globbing together. Give it another 5 or 10 years.
Pretty much. So we're gonna get started talking about the teams on Northwestern's schedule. Normally, we do it in order. First game, second game, third game, on like that. But as we have Eastern Illinois, an FCS team, which we don't have quite as much information on, quite as much to really dive into.
Let's put massive asterisk. Can't scream this loudly enough. This is not us disrespecting Eastern Illinois, a very good FCS team.
In no way, shape, or form are we doing that. What we're doing is we are combining our preview with Eastern Illinois with our review of Big Ten Media Days. Media Days are going on. It's a 3-day affair this year with our 4 new additions. I'm sure everyone has seen the photo of Oregon's gigantic inflatable duck that was roaming around rivers in Indianapolis. But so David Braun and the rest of the Northwestern contingent spoke on Tuesday. And very different tenor than last year's David Braun press conference.
I was going to say that was the thing hanging over the entire deal. Braun got multiple questions about it. When the BTN did the panel interview, Dave Revson immediately went right at that, which was like, what a difference a year makes. And Revson said right off the bat, he was like, I can't ever remember a more awkward situation than the situation that you were in 1 year ago. And it's like, yeah, we were all transported back to that moment. And man, it wasn't fun at the time, but it certainly does, cast into relief just how amazing last season was and the place that Braun is in right now. I mean, you could see he is the same great guy that he was last year, but now he's wearing a little bit more experience and the confidence of being the reigning Big Ten Coach of the Year.
Did it feel like to you guys that I saw a quip on maybe it was Rivals, their review of things from Matt Shelton, or maybe it was an Inside and quip, but somebody implied that Braun is cut from the same cloth as Fitz when it comes to naming a QB starter. But outside of that, I felt like he said quite a lot about the team and his thought process and what he's excited about, and how players have been developing and progressing, what practices looked like, what they expect to see on the field in the fall. Am I taking crazy pills? Is this just wishful thinking?
No, I see what you're saying though, but yeah.
No, I agree, and I think we talked all last season and into the off season about just how amazingly forthright Braun is all the time. Not just in terms of X's and O's, not just in terms of, people would think of whatever the opposite of Bill Belichick is, right? Like someone who is, no one wants you to dump the playbook out for everyone to see or whatever. But we've talked before about how Braun's, when we say forthcoming, it's not so much an X's and O's thing as he'll really let you know what his emotions are, what he's feeling, if he's worried about something, if he's conflicted about something. He really wears his heart on his sleeve, and he'll tell it to you straight. So I think we've always been impressed with that. I think specifically relative to probably what a lot of people had the most questions about, right, which is the new Northwestern offense. He definitely gave us, I feel like, a little bit of insight in terms of, at least, I think, Scuzz, you were talking about it beforehand, right? The specific reference to this ground focus relative to the running backs that he wants to develop.
Yeah, he I don't know if he said it word for word, but as close as possible to saying like we're going to be a run first team. Anybody looking at the roster with a magnifying glass is going to kind of come to the same conclusion, right? You've got Jack Lausch and Mike Wright as really fast QBs that, I mean, Wright has a lot more experience throwing the ball, but is not a gunslinger by any stretch of the imagination. And then at the other side of the spectrum is Ryan Helinski. And I think any critical evaluation of that, and then the rest of the talent that you have on the offense, this is a insanely fast team. When you think about Joseph Hyman, when you think about Wright, when you think about Lausch, AJ Henning, Caleb Komalafe, there's so much speed on the field, and they're going to use that as their kind of primary attack and primary advantage. And I think, a lot of people we've spent the better part of 15 years on this podcast bemoaning the lack of a downfield passing attack or the inconsistency with which we've targeted, whether it's tight ends or big wideouts downfield, et cetera, et cetera. And I couldn't be more excited for what Zach Lujan's going to potentially do with these players. And just like hearing Braun talk about trusting those offensive coaches to crush their job and being willing to delegate and let them do their thing. Everything that we have read and seen and heard about Lujan in the media since he was hired, about his creativity, his what is I think likely going to be a meteoric rise as a coach in the professional ranks, and I include college in that. And then just the speed and the talent you see on the team. It's exciting to start to see that picture come together, and it's frankly exciting to hear Braun intone that this is Cam Porter is going to be a key leader in that running back room and a key focal point for the team. You're going to see Komalafe and Hyman have critical roles. Like, just those words are exciting as you start to piece together and think about the type of offenses NU's going to have and the type of multiple, creative, confusing look that Lujan's going to put on the field. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, I think, but Matt Shelton did a rundown on Lujan, and on something like 70% of their plays at South Dakota State last year, they were running motion or checking at the line or doing something different and creative from the initial call. And it's just going to be fascinating to watch that all play out. So this is media days has been like the aperitif to really get the juices flowing.
Yeah.
You made mention earlier about the quarterback situation, that they're not naming a starter. Honestly, you look at the way they said it, I don't get any caginess out of that at all. Like, it doesn't feel like they're trying to play we're not naming a starter.
But it is easy when there's no,
and we don't know.
Yeah, it's easy when there's no really clear heir apparent or returning starter or something of that nature. So I guess they have that going for them.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, hey, it's an open competition. Someone's going to emerge, and when it does, it does. I think it doesn't feel like they're playing it inside. They're holding their cards up their sleeve or playing it close to the vest. It's like, we are not sure yet. We haven't seen Mike Wright play on our field yet. He came in after spring ball. So, I mean, Lausch, Helinski, you got Wright coming in. Get him on the field. Let's see what happens.
Well, the other thing, too, right, is we have the confidence of knowing. Now, granted, Mike Wright has thrown the ball in college way more than Jack Lausch has thrown the ball. And that is an incontrovertible fact. But they're very similar types of quarterbacks, right? These are guys who want to run and are both incredibly fast. We've talked before about one of the beauties of having these two guys is you ought to be able to run the same offense through the same two guys, right? And frankly, you're talking about a running quarterback. You're talking about a quarterback who's probably going to be, moving downfield and taking contact. You're going to need both guys. So, yeah, exactly. I think there's no one being like, hey, who is it? We have to know which guy is it, and being like, hey, we're all interested. I'm sure it'll be a fair competition. We'll see which guy. We're going to need both of them. They ought to be able to execute the same kind of stuff, but we're going to see who the number one guy is. I mean, if I'm betting that it's right, but we don't know. And that's okay. yeah, I think we're all okay with it. Which it kind of folds into something that I think maybe Scuzz was alluding to earlier, which is it's impossible. We've talked about this before, for Northwestern fans to divorce all of our previous baggage from anything being like, is David Braun like being incredibly forthright relative to X's and O's, or are we just like all like, imaging that onto him because of the previous experience we've all shared, right? like we were talking about, where it's like he specifically made the point of saying that it is key that this defense be flexible and adaptable. And those are just generally good traits to have in an offense, but it's almost impossible for any Northwestern fan to hear that and not, juxtapose that with the previous administration, which no one would have at any point accused of being flexible or adaptable, right? So I think you see those kinds of things. The other thing relative to the running game that he, when he was talking about that, a couple of different things. Number one, it made me start thinking about the offensive line, because I think there's been a lot of hand-wringing about the offensive line, and that's because of so many transfers coming in, and obviously some areas that were unsettled due to injuries, etc. But one thing that I was thinking about when, saying like, hey, we're going to run at people, is like, there are some really good pieces on the offensive line. I mean, you can look at some of the tea leaves and like, we're talking about Caleb Tiernan's going to be one of the better left tackles in the conference, and Josh Thompson, a very capable right tackle. There's a lot of talk of him like moving into the interior of the line somewhere. And if you're moving him into the interior of the line, that must mean that you think you've got another pretty good option to play right tackle instead, right? And then a guy like Jordan Knox, who we saw really obliterating people in the, against Utah before he got hurt. There's some real pieces there. And maybe there's a feeling that, hey, like they're liking what they see in that OL room and they're thinking we're going to blow some holes. And then the other piece of that dovetails directly to, a guy who also went to Big Ten Media Days, and that's Cam Porter. And you guys mentioned him earlier, but I think maybe I've been guilty of doing this, but Joseph Hyman is such an electric player. Scuzz talked about the speed and how much speed this team's going to put on the field, and Hyman being like that we don't want to give short shrift to how Porter played the second half of last season. Because it's really important for everyone to understand, right, that like if you look at Cam Porter's entire career, the single most impressive stretch of that career is the second half of his freshman year, when he helped get Northwestern into a Big Ten championship game. The second best stretch he's had was the end of last season. He was awesome down the stretch. I was watching highlights of it again today. You got to go back. Watch him take Wisconsin apart. Watch him take Purdue apart. Cam Porter was great down the stretch last year. And it's kind of crazy to stop and think about. But we're almost exactly 4 years removed from that big injury that he had, right? Coming into his sophomore season. I mean, it's wild to think about, but it's nonetheless true. Or I guess coming into his... Now, was it junior season? Crazy to think about. But it's that far in the rearview mirror at this point. And he's, he was running really hard and really well at the end of last season. And seeing him up there, and realizing, oh, yeah, we have a really experienced veteran running back who can be that kind of bell cow at the front of this attack. Like, that matters. And it's good that we all remind ourselves of that.
You had Xander Mueller, you had Cam Porter, you had AJ Henning also there. Did you guys take anything away from what they had to say?
I mean, AJ Henning, not the most uncomfortable person in the world in front of a camera. that I think it came up that he has something like 100,000 followers on social media or something like that, and that is not surprising when you see him in front of a camera. He is all flash. Megawatt smile, answers every question just unbelievably well, full of personality. And, he's a star. And speaking of highlights, you go back and you watch all the catches that he made, every single game down the stretch of last season. That guy made massive plays, and it's reminding yourself like, oh, yeah, we have a big-time playmaking wide receiver. We have several, right? Because we have Bryce Kurtz, too, just, to name another. But yeah, Henning just has that swag and has that flash, and in every way carries himself like a number one wide receiver.
I'm glad that Mueller was there. John, you've been talking about him all summer. He got some preseason accolades, all Big Ten, I believe, a couple other things. Maybe not as high as he should have been, as is often, the case with Northwestern players. But I think his role as a leader on the defense, even if he's playing on the outside, which I believe that's what you think is going to happen, right, John? That he's going to play outside.
I think they're saying that he'll probably stay outside. Yeah. But I mean, again, like we're not going to know until we see it.
I mean, typically it's the middle linebacker, right? Often a Gallagher who has been in that role for Northwestern over the past many years. But I think the inclusion of Xander, even though he's not going to be playing that traditional Mike position, speaks volumes about his talent, his pedigree, and his leadership on the field. And as you've been hearing John say for months, like that, he's going to be the focal point of this defense, and it's going to be really exciting to see what they can do to unlock and unleash him.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that I keep coming back to. I mean, obviously, like we're later in the summer, we're going to get to all of our previews and everything, but one of the things that I think I keep coming back to is like I can name 12 guys that are going to play in some fashion across the defensive line in front of Xander Mueller, who I feel pretty good about. We have a deep group. They're all going to play. They're all going to rotate through. And there's going to be a ton of personnel looks and a ton of formations. But yeah, this is we believe, the best returning linebacker in the conference. And he's playing behind a veteran defensive line that is pretty tested.
John, to be fair, we're not the only ones who believe that. I mean, he is showing up in first team preseason, right, all Big Ten, all over the place.
Right, exactly. And he's like, you go back and like, this is a guy who's had a game-saving tackle against Minnesota, had an interception that won the Purdue game, right? And on and on and on. He's everywhere making all the plays. And right, so you think and you're like, it's not like in a vacuum, like, oh, that's all we have. Remember, Northwestern returns 85% of the defensive line and adds several guys who we thought were going to get on the field last year, and then they didn't end up getting on the field, okay? Like, there's a lot in front of him. A lot of what was successful last year is going to be, going to run back. And it's like we joked there, he had that awesome sport coat in Indy that he opened up and the lining was all Northwestern. And I couldn't resist putting up a gif of someone asking like, hey, what's that inside your lining? And him just being like, doom is inside my lining. It's like, yeah, don't forget, this guy is an absolute monster. And that, like, when you're putting together your prognostications for Northwestern football, make sure you factor in that we very well might return the best linebacker in the conference.
There's two other little things that jumped out to me, and I'm just looking at the conference press conference notes that David Gold and Ethan Siegel put up on Inside NU. But so one, Braun was asked about the new headset rules and the communication rules in the quarterback and middle linebacker helmets, and of course, Northwestern got to trial that in the bowl game against Utah last year. But this is going to be a new wrinkle and a new dimension. Like, you're not going to see the crazy signage and the weird signals and the multiple backup QBs on the side of the field doing crazy things with their arms anymore. At least I don't think you will. I think most teams are just going to communicate through the helmet and keep it simple. But that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. The part that was interesting to me first is that Braun talked about how Skip Holtz was giving him a lot of advice going to the bowl game last year on this, because Holtz, of course, used mic'd up helmets in the USFL, et cetera, and had plenty of experience with that. So that's just going to be an interesting thing to watch across all of college football. And then loosely related to that, they asked him about analytics, and of course, this is as you guys know, this is my heartbeat, the analytics in sports, et cetera. And I like David Braun is a man after my own heart right now. Talked about like his first quote, in terms of clock management, it is a critical tool. That just like makes me so happy. And he goes on to talk about, that the computer doesn't know like your right guard is out, but like with conviction, for clock management, this is so important, and it's good. It helps us avoid mistakes late in games and everything else. And then there was another question I just want to briefly dovetail with. This was like somebody asked me about using EA Sports college football as a learning tool, and it brings me to like a joke that Bill Simmons has been telling forever, as he talks about NFL and like, why don't these NFL coaches just have hire some kid who's an expert at Madden to just tell them what to do in late game situations? And it feels like that storyline has played out in the David Braun interview experience from Media Days, and I love it. I'm so here for it.
That's fantastic.
It's funny if we're talking about the genius that we're hoping for on the offensive side of the ball, right? Be it analytics and everything else. Obviously, Lujan is a huge piece. Braun was asked a bunch about Lujan. One thing that I found very interesting about that he said, which was kind of for me one of those like head slapping, like, oh yeah, duh moments. I think a lot of us have been thinking like, oh, there's this big FCS brain trust that's been coming in, right? Like Braun's North Dakota State, Lujan South Dakota State, Christian Smith is South Dakota State. And Braun like made the very good point that it's like basically like reminding everyone like, you got to understand like North Dakota State and South Dakota State hate each other. Like it's basically the idea, right, of if like suddenly like we just imported all of these Illinois coaches, we'd be like, wait, what did we do? Wait a second. Illinois guys? Like, and this I feel like is much like this is like the North-South Dakota rivalry. Like those teams hate each other. And Braun was very much like, I think kind of dispelling this notion that like everyone thinks that we're all just like buddy. And I was like, hey, let's bring in some more guys from like the Dakotas. And he was very much with like, no, Lujan is like the guy on like our hated enemy team that I had to plan for every year. And it's like, it's not like I was this big Zach Lujan fan. Like when I came to Northwestern, and basically being like Christian Smith coming in from South Dakota State really kind of helped smooth the path and be like, okay, like now we've got a guy from the enemy who's here and he's a good guy, and like we're all good, and like it's not like Braun doesn't get it. It's not like Braun doesn't know how amazing Lujan was. But I think for anyone being like, oh, this is just one FCS guy bringing another FCS guy in, it's like, no, this is a guy who respects a guy so much that he went to his former hated rival to pull in a new coaching mind. And it's like, yeah, it's like a moment where you stop and go, oh yeah, that makes sense.
If you or a loved one is seriously injured by someone else's negligence, hire Kent Simpson of the Simpson Law Group. After over a decade prosecuting murder cases in Chicago, Simpson opened his own firm focused on wrongful death and personal injury cases. He specializes in car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and other transportation accidents, as well as construction accidents, medical negligence, slip and falls, product liability, and more. Millions recovered for clients. No fee unless he wins. The Simpson Law Group. Compassion, empathy, and vigorous advocacy. Go to simpsonlawgroup.com or call 312-332-2107 for a free consultation. And go Cats. So let's talk about, as we pivot back to our previews, let's talk about week 3. Let's talk about Eastern Illinois. This is that FCS game that we have grown to fear. And, Scuzz, you are on record every single year about how much you absolutely hate the FCS game. And, there's no upside and all the downside. And we've seen that downside live and in person.
Far too often.
And the number of times we've lost this FCS game. So we have an Eastern Illinois team coming in. They're no pushovers. John, what can you tell us about the Panther D?
Well, first of all, Sam, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sure that this game is just going to be a walk in the park. I think this is going to be a nice, relaxing afternoon that every Northwestern fan can just sit back and enjoy.
Why would you say that?
How dare
Why would you say that?
How dare you?
That's exactly.
You
I think
just
it's
put
so
that out
funny.
in the world. I got to edit that out. I mean, I'm sorry. That's
I'm looking up. Is there a bolt of lightning about to strike?
Didn't you listen to our UCLA preview where I talked about the Sun Bowl? My God, man.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Obviously, this whole situation has been like a house of horrors for us. We all know. I mean, heck, it's like I think last year might have been one of the times where you're like, well, Howard, at least this time it's a kind of a mid to low level MEAC team, and then Edgar and James' son went absolutely ballistic in that game in the fourth quarter. It's like we know how this dance goes, right? But beyond that, if we're looking at the defense, like for what it's worth, just to pile on, yeah, Eastern Illinois is a program big time on the rise in the FCS with a very good coach, Chris Wilkerson, who is the reigning conference coach of the year. And I mean this will be a battle between two reigning conference coaches of the years in this game. And it's interesting because whereas, and we kind of just talked about it with media days, whereas Northwestern went down to the FCS ranks to get David Braun, Eastern Illinois, an FCS team, went to the Division III ranks to get Chris Wilkerson, who had been a really successful coach at the University of Chicago, and he'd previously been the associate head coach at Dartmouth before that. And again, just like Braun, Wilkerson vastly exceeded expectations at EIU.
John, can I jump in with a quote here? So this is from FCS Fan Central, one of the previews I read to prep for this. Quote, Eastern Illinois made a massive jump in the second season under head coach Chris Wilkerson. It was the Panthers' first winning season since 2017 and their highest win total since 2013. And they enter next season with the most returning starters in their conference, which has Eastern Illinois primed for its first run to the FCS playoffs since 2015. So this is like the best EIU team in a decade.
Super. Awesome. Great. For our FCS game, we get like the first great like EIU team since Garoppolo, basically, or something like that. But on the defensive side of the ball, so let's start here. It's the number one scoring defense in their conference, which is the Big South / OVC conference. They had the number one scoring defense in the conference last year. They had 3 first-team all-conference defensive players and 1 second-team all-conference defensive players. Now, the best 2 of those players, FCS All-American defensive backs Blake Ruffin and Russell Dandy, are both gone now. So Ruffin transferred to Louisville, and Dandy is in the New York Giants training camp right now. And that's really big because although this is a really solid defense overall at the FCS level, its strength big time, and this is what contributed to the scoring defense being so highly ranked, is they really did a good job at forcing turnovers. So they led their conference in both interceptions and forced fumbles. And those 2 defensive backs that I just mentioned were a huge driver for all of that. So with that said, Eastern Illinois still has its best linebacker, Elijah Tolbert, who put his name into the portal last year and then pulled his name back out of the portal, and a pair of very good FCS defensive ends in Joel Barrows and Drake Van Hift. So this is, at the FCS level, still going to be a very stout defense. But again, it's like at some point, like you kind of just have to step back and be like, it's not so much about like raw talent here. I think we're all more than familiar with how these games go. So if for whatever reason we're taking our foot off the gas on offense or dealing with some sort of major offensive issue, this game is going to become a much bigger problem than we'd like it to be. On the other hand, if we have our offense and our quarterback situation figured out by Game 3 when we play Eastern Illinois, obviously we have more than enough talent to deal with this defense in every way. And yeah, if only it were ever that simple.
So, I mean, because you think about Eastern Illinois, and obviously, we mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo, Tony Romo comes to mind, Sean Payton comes to mind, Mike Shanahan comes to mind. There's a lot of names associated with Eastern Illinois' offense. I'm hoping that you're not going to be dropping some names that should be names to keep our eyes out for.
Yeah, this is not that kind of Eastern Illinois offense. I mean, they have a look of being really solid, not flashy, but really solid. They do not have the type of athletic mismatches that have really worried me in years past in some of these games. Edgerrin James kid that John mentioned previously as an example, but they are really well coached and they execute. So they have 9 starters back on offense, including quarterback Pierce Holly. He put up very solid numbers last year. He finished tied for 19th in all of FCS in passing yards. But it's notable that he's not a dual threat guy. And he's not 19th sounds like it's pretty high, but the drop off from like 5 to 6 is pretty precipitous. So, good passer, not huge with his legs. Again, solid execution, not going to throw a lot of turnovers, but isn't going to be leading an explosive offense. Their best receivers are all kind of medium-sized guys, 5'11 to 6'1", no real big targets or threats. They have some effective weapons, particularly Eli Mirza is someone to watch out for. He was their top receiver last year. They have a prototypical tight end. They have some really solid depth at running back. The starter, MJ Flowers, is excellent. And then they've got two guys, Kevin Daniels, who's like a freight train, and Kendi Young, who's a real speedster. These guys are both really effective and could elevate their games this year. The weakness on this offense last year was sacks. They gave up 35 despite having a lot of returning starters on offensive line. Much of that line is back again this year. They have 140 career offensive line starts. That's a huge number. You would think it's a really good base to start from, but if sacks were a problem last year and we're bringing back most of the same guys, like might still be a little bit of a problem / opportunity for our defense. Now, we kind of, like, I dropped that quote earlier, and you heard John talking about Wilkerson and the trajectory of this team. EIU is basically the pick du jour in the FCS right now. Everyone who covers them is talking about them as the team to watch out for, the most improved team, etc. But I think it's really important that we don't conflate that talk track and this offense in particular with the gaudy offenses that you hear about at South Dakota State or in Grand Forks or New Hampshire, etc. They're not going to blitz us offensively and score a bajillion points. Most games last year, they ended up around like 28 to 30 points. They only put up 15 on Bowling Green in their one FBS matchup, and Bowling Green was a pretty middle of the road FBS or Group of 5 team last year. But, and John kind of intoned this earlier, if the Cats don't take this one seriously, this EIU team is good enough and well coached enough. You can't beat them only playing one half. We are going to have to really take this team seriously. I expect that we will, but this is not going to be a walk in the park.
Normally, this is the part in the preview where we go through their entire schedule. Not going to do that, but there is one thing to note. As we start to prep for Eastern Illinois, they open their season on Thursday, August 29th. At Illinois. So we will get to see them against a Big Ten team 2 weeks before they come to Evanston. So, just something to kind of keep your eye on as, that Thursday night before the opening weekend. Between Illinois and us, they play Indiana State at home. So, cool. But, just a little, something to keep an eye on. It's that game at Illinois is going to be on Big Ten Network.
And then on the flip side, right, from our perspective, this is the last team we play before we go out to Seattle and play the team that finished second in the nation this past season. So there, you kind of have to avoid trap. You have to avoid just being like lulling yourself to sleep. I think as we've beaten into the ground so far, like talking about EIU, Northwestern is the last fan base that would ever allow a team to do that. The scars are way too deep. We all know how the FCS game goes. But yeah, I mean, I think if you look, like Scuzz mentioned, that Bowling Green game, right? Like, this was not a dominant FCS team. It was a really smart, well-coached FCS team. They forced a lot of turnovers. They protected the ball. They moved the ball effectively and methodically, and they ground out a lot of really important wins. That's the mark of a really well-coached team. It's a team that, again, right, we should have a massive athletic advantage here. And, right, like Sam said, we'll have seen them play against Illinois, and hopefully we can leverage that and get as smooth an FCS game as Northwestern University is ever possibly capable of having.
It's going to be interesting. Part of our trauma in this lane is the penchant our prior coaching staff had of really like keeping things super vanilla, going deep into the backups. That's honestly something that Braun did last year against Howard, especially on defense. Really went deep into the depth chart, and we paid for it with some white knuckling down the stretch. It's going to be interesting to see how this coaching staff approaches the non-con this year, because I think last year, especially they started out the gate with Rutgers. They played a Big Ten team in week 1. This year, that's not the case. All 3 non-conference games are the first 3 weeks, but you don't get the sense. I don't get the same. The absence of the divisions kind of changes your strategy as you're thinking about the Big Ten conference for starters, and then I just there's not many coaches out there that played it the way Fitz did, and I don't expect Braun to approach it the same way either. So that is at least reason for optimism in this game, in the Miami of Ohio game, in that Northwestern is not going to swallow the playbook or stay super vanilla. They should recognize and understand how critical and important these games and these wins are. That's something I'm going to be looking for, candidly, in those first 3 weeks of the season.
And for what it's worth, too, like, Braun did play a bunch of guys in defense last year, and for what it's worth, like, may he be able to do that again this year? May we have the situation where he can do that, and yet we're not white knuckling? Because let me tell you, like, one of the guys who got his first meaningful minutes in the Howard game last year was Michael Kilbane. And, I would say it was a little bit of a rough ride for him in that game. By the end of the season, he was totally transformed, and all offseason has driven rave reviews, and, like, is a guy that's singled out to be like, this guy is coming. He's going to be a phenomenal contributor for Northwestern football. You want guys to get on the field. Guys get on the field, they start getting reps, and they really start to transform as football players. So, if we can do it and, like, somehow, some dominant first half, and then like a second half where we can actually get some of these guys in, like, man.
Well, and in defense of the decision, right? It was like 23-7. Like, we had controlled the game throughout, and then they hit a big touchdown play, and I believe got a turnover, and then that's all of a sudden when you started to the momentum swung so dramatically. But to your point, may us be in a UTEP situation where we're up 30 before we make that decision this time around.
Anything else to mention on Eastern Illinois before we get out of here tonight?
I can't help, John, you talk about their penchant for turnovers last year, how critical that was, and then losing those 2 DBs. I can't help thinking about the Illinois defense and what happened to them the year after they put
when you lose all your best guys from the secondary,
3 DBs into the NFL. And that's, again, this is like a more of a wishful thinking kind of point of view. So, but it's going to be really interesting to see them play Illinois week 1. Bringing back a returning starter at quarterback and some other players, et cetera. So that's a heck of a litmus test and a great chance for Northwestern to get some game tape that will help them in week 3.
One other thing that I would add, not on Eastern Illinois, but taking it back to Media Day, just want to shout out a couple of people we consider our folks, like well represented at Media Day. I think when Braun was asked questions, like they televised the first couple of questions, and Matt Shelton, friend of the pod, was first one to ask a question, and then next up was Ethan Siegel, current editor-in-chief of Inside NU. So that was really cool. Just cool to see a lot of great Northwestern folks. And then Sydney Supley has been making the rounds at Big Ten Media Days also, has been doing all kinds of coverage work for them, taking like a brief break from all the softball work she's been doing to duck into Media Days and do a bunch of stuff there too. So it's really cool just to see all of our folks and different friends of the pod and people we know and just respect doing great work there. So shout out to all those people.
So with that, we'll go ahead and leave it there for tonight. Head to our website, westlotpirates.com, where you can leave comments and questions. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as YouTube at Westlot Pirates. You can always email the show, westlotpirates@gmail.com. Tune in next time as we give our pastoral and statistical views on Northwestern athletics. Look for us in the West Lot O'Brien Field flying the red pirate flag, because we give no quarter, especially the fourth. For John Lacombe and Eric Scasbo and Sam Walter, thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.